and that Jukinda Ahern, or whatever her name is. I said to myself, I'm not rewarding that. I'm just not. I'm not. And if I'm back in the Southern Hemisphere, I will go there. I'm sure I will love it. They seem like great people, but they're going to have to take a breather after that, just as penance, because you elect someone like that, you know, we're going to have to punish you. I'm sorry. In the same way you would your children, who you love. You know what I mean? But if they write obscenities on the wall in crayon, you spank them because you love them. And that's how I feel about the Kiwis. You elect that chick, I'm not coming to your country for 10 years. Okay? I think that's fair. I'm not, right? I'm not saying that in the spirit of judgment, merely in the hope of a little corrective punishment. But what is it about those cultures, which really is the best culture in the world? In fact, you know it's the best culture in the world because the rest of the world wants to come to our countries, and is, actually, by the millions. And on the one hand, I think it's destroying our countries. On the other hand, I have sort of sympathy, but also pride. You know, why our countries? Why those 5 English-speaking countries? Why are they the countries that everyone in the world wants to move to? I mean, I'm proud of that, actually. I get it, because they're better, because they're freer, because they're nicer, and they're better places to live. They're also more prosperous, but that's not the whole story. The culture, some of the culture, the welcoming culture that the rest of the world recognizes and loves. And here's what it is. Here's my theory. And by the way, if you don't agree, shout out. Not that I will understand you with your accents, but I will try. I love the accents, by the way. I do. I noticed the Australian alphabet only has 25 letters. You took the R out. Is that true? Active parliament or just like habit? I don't know. But I was just in Cairns. I was there for 3 days, and every day I said to at least 5 people, nice cans. Nobody laughed, not one person laughed. I thought it was hilarious. I was the only one laughing. What? It looks like Cairns to me. Whatever. But here's my theory. So, and I think this is right. I think this is what all of our nations have in common, and I think there are 2 qualities that distinguish our culture, our common culture. And the first is physical bravery, duty and honor. It's one of the reasons that those countries, which are a small percentage of the world's population, have produced a disproportionate amount of war heroes, of brave men willing to fight around the world for centuries, lay down their lives in enormous numbers. True bravery. Those 5 countries, even Canada, which I love making fun of. Even Canada had a remarkable record of bravery and service in the First World War. I mean, actually remarkable. It's no longer even acknowledged now. But the Canadians fought like the truly brave people that they were. Canada is just one example in your country. I mean, you were in no sense involved in the war that broke out in 1914. It was not a threat to Australia. And yet, without thinking, tens of thousands of Australians marched off to the Dardanelles to death because they thought it was the right thing to do. And you still, to your great credit, acknowledge their sacrifice at Gallipoli and other places. And so those countries, because of that quality, are almost impossible to invade. If someone showed up on the shores of Australia and said, we're taking over your country now, every person in this room would rise as one and lay down their lives to defend your country. Well, they are doing it now. They are doing it now. But they're doing it in a very passive-aggressive way. So that's kind of the point I'm making. So if you said to Australians, or Americans, or Kiwis, or even the Brits, a shadow of their former selves, but even if you said to the Brits, we're going to invade you, or some foreign power is going to show up with a hypodermic needle and inject you with something that has not been tested against your will, you would rise up as one and say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to submit to that because we're proud and brave. So that's the best quality, I would say, in our culture. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the other good quality I think that we have as a civilization is decency and politeness, the reverence for order, the belief that you should take care of other people. These are Christian ideas. This is fundamentally, whether you're a believing or practicing Christian or not, it's a Christian civilization. And the basis, of course, of that civilization is the belief that God created each person. Every human life has value. We are not slaves, we're not objects, we're not animals. We are human beings created in the image of God, and every person, good and bad, has inherent value. And it's what makes us distinct. Not every culture believes that. Non-Christian cultures do not believe that. I'm not attacking anybody, that's just a fact. By the way, non-Christians by the millions move to our countries because they acknowledge, even though they don't share the religion, they acknowledge that's a really good thing to live in a society that openly says out loud, you're a human being. You have inalienable rights given to you by God, not by government, by God. That's a Christian idea. Here's the problem. Our dedication to decency, caring for others, putting other people's concerns above our own, to politeness, to order, to queuing up in line, those can be exploited by people who mean us ill to defeat us. So while Australians, if you were told on television, we're going to inject you forcibly with some substance, we're not going to tell you what it is, we're coming from a foreign country, we're going to make you submit to this, you would fight. But if we tell you, you need to take this medicine if you care about the elderly, if you care about your society, if you're a good person, if you're a decent human being, you will do this for others. If you tell Australians that, or Americans, or Brits, or Canadians, or Kiwis, if you tell them that, they'll do it. And that's exactly what's happened. Not simply with COVID, but with every attack on our sovereignty and our humanity over the past 10 years has come by that route. Has come by appeals to our decency. And because we are, I think it is fair to say, inherently decent people living in famously decent civilizations that, again, the rest of the world acknowledges as decent. That's why they move here, because our justice systems are fair, because the individual is treated as a human being. These are all good things. But because we have those qualities, unscrupulous people who mean us harm have been able to defeat us. Not through aggression, but through passive aggression, through the feline approach. Not barking like a dog, but rubbing against us like a cat. Truly. And they're very close to defeating us by subverting our best instincts. And you see this up and down our societies on almost every issue. In my country, we've been told that we can't have police, that we can't enforce the law, that we have to submit to violence, including sexual violence, from criminals. Because if we don't, we're not being kind or compassionate. We're racist. We're bad people if we don't submit to crime, to watching our own children get hurt. And we're doing it. There are cities in the United States that effectively don't have law enforcement. So if you said to Americans, again, an invading army is coming to spread havoc and chaos in our cities, people would say no, and they would take up arms, which we actually have in our country. No offense. We would take up arms. But if you say to Americans, and I'm sure there's got to be some corollary of this here in Australia, if you say to Americans, if you're a decent person, you will allow this, because there are people in our society who have a right to victimize you, to hurt you, and you're bad if you're against that. If you tell them that, they'll put up with it. The same is true on the question of immigration. If you say to people, in my country, we had 30 million people, 30 million in 4 years. They lie about the numbers, that's the real number. 30 million in 4, bigger than the entire population of Australia by 4 million. That's a lot of people in 4 years, all illegally. Violating our laws, coming over, most young men like an invading army, which effectively it is. If you told Americans that was going to happen, they would flock to the border with their own firearms and prevent it. But that's not what they told us. They said these are asylum seekers. These are people seeking succor and protection and opportunity. And if you're a good person, you'll ignore the fact that they're violating our laws, which we as your leaders have sworn to uphold. If you're a decent person, you'll allow this. And the effect, of course, has been very much the same as if the country was just invaded by a foreign army. It's been a radical decrease in quality of life for people who were born in the United States. It's made the country worse and poorer and more chaotic. It's been awful, actually, of course. A country is a country because it has a border. When you don't have a border, you're not a country. You're something less than that. Everyone understands it, but they've been allowed to do this because they appeal to our better angels, to our decency, which is inherent in us. You see it in the question of speech. I see it in your country. What are they telling you now? They're telling you that the things you say on the internet, if they're critical of your leaders, lead to violence. You've had stabbings in Australia. Therefore, we need to make it illegal to criticize the people in charge. And if you say those things, you're not just disagreeing with your totally illegitimate leaders. No, you're committing harms. Your misinformation is hurting other people. And because they're appealing to your decency, and because no one wants to hurt other people, decent people don't want to hurt other people, almost no one has stood up and said the obvious, which is, really? Are we keeping track of the harms wrought by misinformation? How about the people who told us that the vax was safe and effective? Are they responsible? Let's keep a list of all the people who are injured or killed by the vaccine. No one's keeping a list. Really? Misinformation harms people. Well, I think it probably does. And we know that because of the things, the lies you've told us over the last decade and the people who've been hurt by them. You told us that quarantining us in our homes, locking us down, taking away our freedom of movement, treating us like penned animals, was going to save us from the flu. How many suicides did that cause? How much blood do you have on your hands based on that lie? Now that we're keeping track of the harms wrought by misinformation. But nobody says that. It's outrageous that they would tell you that. But the reason that nobody says that is because people are paralyzed by the thought that they might be harming another person because they're decent. Again, I can't state this emphatically enough or often enough. They are planning to, and are in the process of, in my country, they're far closer to the goal than they are here, in the process of taking away your most basic human rights in the name of decency. It's not decent. They're conquering you, actually. They're subduing you. They're treating you like slaves. But no one acknowledges it because they have such a deep commitment to being decent to other people. And make no mistake, when someone tells you you're not allowed to say what you believe, you're not allowed to express yourself as a human being, that person is not treating you as a human being. That person is treating you as a slave. Free people can say what they think. Period. That is the hallmark of being a free person. Of course. How can you I'm an adult man. I'm 55 years old. I pay my taxes. Well, I love you too. I did understand that. Your accent did not obscure the message. Thank you. I love your accent. I love how you use profanity too. It's like so inventive. There it is. It's so inventive. It's so great. Even someone did scream obscenities at me here, but did it while smiling. And then I realized that was a compliment. I had no idea. Called me a very bad word, a word you can't say in the United States. And I said, what is it? It means you're my mate. Oh, okay. I love you guys. Sorry, sidebar. But the freedom to say what you think is an inherent freedom. It doesn't derive from an act of parliament or my country Congress. It's not something you were granted. It's something that you were born with that distinguishes you from the subhuman categories, like animals. And once they take that away from you, there's nothing they can't do to you. There's absolutely nothing they can't do to you. And if there's one criticism I would have of the other 4 countries in the Anglosphere is that that fact is not encoded in your founding documents. In none of your countries. Neither here, nor in New Zealand, nor in the UK, nor in Canada. And I think the reason is that the people who founded those countries never imagined, because they were Christians, that there would come a time when that would ever be called into doubt. The United States is a revolutionary country. It emerged after a war, so the people who founded it had a lot of time to think about this. But in Australia and the UK, I think they just assumed they would never come to a place where the government would decide what citizens were allowed to say. That was such an outlandish idea because it violates the most basic precept of the country itself, which is that this is a country of free people who have ownership in the government. The government doesn't own your country. Your founding documents do say that. The country is owned by you, its citizens. You're shareholders in Australia. And so by what right could they possibly tell you that you're not allowed to express your opinion? Well, of course, there is no right. That's a crime against you. And it's not merely a crime, it's an early warning sign of what's to come.